Hello, friends. I'm Rosie Acosta, your host and guide on this journey to self-discovery and radical love. I've walked a path filled with challenges. Growing up in East LA during the '92 LA riots, it left me searching for meaning, for mentors, for a way to truly understand the purpose of life. But you know what I found? The power of conversation. So I decided to create a space where we can share these conversations with you, our community. And that's how the Radically Loved podcast was born. Join me as we dive into topics like mindfulness, spirituality, self-love, and the keys to overall healthy living. I'm joined by my dear friend, fellow author, producer, and teacher, Tessa Tovar.
Hi, I'm Tessa, and I'm grateful to be part of this community because it teaches me so much about what it means to be human. Ever since I was a little one, I was always asking the deeper questions in life. Why are we here? What happens when we are gone? What is the purpose of life? I love this show because I get to ask the questions that cut right to the meaning of life. I've learned that no matter how much we want the path to be clear, it never is. And that is actually part of the beauty that creates a radically loved life.
Please do us a favor, share the episodes you love with your friends, and leave us a review. Together, we'll learn how to create a life that's truly, deeply, radically loved. Let's begin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Radically Loved podcast. You can hear Rosie cracking up in the background. We are so excited for today's episode. We have a very special guest. Truly honored to welcome Martha Beck, PhD, back onto the show because she is a repeat guest, and we're just so excited to have you back, Martha. I'll just say a few quick words about you, and then we'll get going into our conversation. Martha Beck is a Harvard-trained sociologist, a world-renowned coach, and New York Times bestselling author. She has published 9 nonfiction books, 1 novel, and more than 200 magazine articles. And we love you, Martha. Thank you for being here.
How does she do it?
Not that well.
Do you know, so I do want to start off first by saying you're amazing. Thank you so much for being such a huge supporter. And I don't know that I told you this before, but the last conversation we had when you were on, we were talking about creativity and getting inspired. And I don't know that the end of our conversation made it onto the show. In fact, I don't think it did because we kind of stayed on a little bit after. It was right after my book launch. And I was telling you how I was a little bit just kind of fried and I just didn't know how I would write another book. And I just really didn't see it in the future. And you said, just give it time. But one day, because I was like, I don't know how, because I feel like I gave this one book everything, right? I feel like I really poured my heart and soul. Yeah, I just put it all. I'm like, there is nothing else I have to say.
Yeah.
And you said, one day you're going to wake up and that thing is going to be there and you're going to go and you're going to write it. And that idea will just come. And that's exactly what happened. And I obviously I thought about you and the next project I'm working on, but I was just, I've used that in the last couple of years with people that have come to me and asked me for, advice on creativity or how do we cultivate more creativity? How do we get into that space when we're not feeling completely connected to that realm? And I send them that podcast and then I tell them what you said. And so obviously thank you for that and thanks for being here. But I think it's a really great way for us to just kind of start off the conversation, since I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast, including Tessa and I, we really love the conversations around creativity and, really how we find it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we find it. I think it finds us. I think one of the way to make it go away is to strive. They've actually done tons and tons of research on like creative problem solving. If they give anybody, so they give a bunch of people an assignment solve a problem that requires a creative use of objects or something. And it takes them 15 minutes to solve or whatever. Then they offer to pay them $5 if they can solve a little similar puzzle. They can't do it. The creative leaps don't happen. And the reason is that they've attached something to it, that there's, okay, now I've got to process and I've got to prove myself and this has got to happen now. And if I get the $5, even just a candy bar will stop people's creativity when it's offered as a reward. So the whole idea of how to get people motivated and how to get ourselves motivated to do something robotic is exactly the opposite of what you have to do to allow creativity to come through you.
So, okay, you're an aspiring author.
She goes, okay.
So, okay, I'm an aspiring author. Like Rosie was
Tessa,
saying,
come on. You're an author. She wrote this she's a beautiful poet. She really is. She's being modest. Come on. She's published.
But Martha, okay, so Rosie knows this. And Martha, I would like you to know too, that ever since I was a little one, I've always have had dreams of being a writer. And like you just described, I can't get started because I attach it to some sort of particular outcome. But I have all these ideas that come to me. And so how do I remove that roadblock?
It's such a juicy question. It's exactly what I'm thinking about myself right now. So it's exciting that you guys are talking about it. First of all, I think the reason that I've been able to get published and write a whole bunch of stuff is that I never wanted to be a writer, never had the slightest inclination that way, and I had no interest in it. And because of that, it was just like, oh, okay, you're going to pay me to write? Fine, whatever. So the people that I know who have grown up dying to write beautifully are the ones that get most blocked. And I've been looking at that razor's edge between wanting to create something and needing to completely let go of the intention to create. It's actually the same brain process that happens to people when they're meditating and they have an enlightenment experience. Because the parts of the brain that shut down when we reach this place of stillness but creativity are the parts that define the sense of self and the part that take control. So great art happens when somebody pushes themselves over and over and over and tries and learns and gets incrementally a little better and a little better and a little better, and then just decides to say, screw it, whatever. And in the moment that they go, then suddenly, boom, all the practice that they've had during the time of striving seems to be picked up and used as a tool by the forces of creation, which then don't feel like they're coming from you, but through you. Have you had that when you're writing? I bet you have, Tessa. You both have.
Yeah. Because like Rosie was saying, I do have a book of published poetry, and all of those poems really started out with no aim or destination. It was just like, I had a dream or I felt inspired. And it wasn't until I met Rosie and started working with her that I had this idea of putting those writings into a book of poetry. So
that's incredible. Yeah. I mean, it's not like it's hard enough to get like handbooks for washing machines published, let alone poetry, Yeah.
Well, and I think just to your point, I think, for me, it was the same thing. Like, I feel like that wave when it comes, there's a difference between me wanting to create something like I have to write another book and I'm going to do it this way rather than I'm really inspired and just doing something. So for me, the intuitive bit is without question. I don't question it. I'm not asking for advice. I'm not trying to get anybody's validation. It's just I'm doing it and I'm keeping it to myself, and it's just I'm allowing it to have as much breath and space as it needs. When I'm doing it from, like you said, a forceful place, it's like a slog. I am walking through mud. It is the most difficult thing and unpleasurable, and it doesn't make me happy, So, and I know, for you too, Marty, like you are also creative. you've written a novel, you've written like characters and novel and story. And I'm curious how that differs to writing more of like the self-development type of book. Like, how do you, is there a integration of the two?
Yeah, it's a very similar process, but every book has its own tone, its own, almost as if it's a being that wants to go off and be, it's like a child you have that's different from your other children. And you have to find that out as you work. And one of the pitfalls people get into when somebody says to me, I just sat down and this river of words just poured out of me. Here's my 390-page book. I wrote it in, 2 months, and every word was inspired. And I'll read it, and it will be absolute dog crap. Okay? That is not the way great art happens. It's the way, it might be fun. You might enjoy it. It's great as a process. But the way creativity takes you to a higher level and makes you feel truly inspired and transformed by the experience is kind of like this. There's a spark of inspiration, and it comes from something that is inside you, like something that wishes to be expressed, and then something outside you where you see something done in a way that stuns you. I remember when I read 100 Years of Solitude. I remember opening the book and reading the first few pages and then closing it and turning it around to the author photo and kissing the author photo because I knew that this book was going to be such a joyride. I wish I could read it in Spanish. Someday I hope I do, but I see something like that. Or I remember reading, for some reason, I'm going to Latin American magical realism. Borges.
Yes, we love it.
I remember reading By the Rivers of Babylon. We sat down and wept, short story by Borges. And I was so overwhelmed by the beauty of the writing that I literally had to sit down. I was walking through a city. I had to sit down on somebody's lawn and cry. So I treasure great writing. And then there were things I wanted to write about, like my son, like things I discovered. And I would try to somehow emulate these great authors. And that is like slogging uphill with a heavy backpack every day and every day throwing away everything you've written. I mean, it's exactly what you're saying, Rosie. It's demonically hard, but you get better and better. And this is called deep practice or dedicated practice. And it's the way people get really good at something. Then after you've done all that deep practice and you've created nothing that you think is worth anything, you just get up in the morning one day and start doodling on a pad and words start to come out because you've done the slog and because you had the spark of ignition. And then because you let go, all of those things are necessary for a creative leap, including the part that I call the impasse. If you have inspiration, really hard work, and total impasse, you're stumped. That's when in the next day, in the next couple of hours, something's going to happen.
Thank you for saying that. I love that. And it almost creates a level of relief, because I feel like for many of us, myself included, Tessa included, the people listening to this podcast included, I feel like we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to create and to everybody's on this timeline, right? It's like, I want to create, I want to be able to publish a book by the time I'm 40, by the time I'm, whatever age, it might be for you. We put these self-imposed deadlines and this self-imposed stress where I feel like when you pose it the way you so beautifully did, it creates this level of relief in sort of a validating way where I feel the permission of allowing the process to happen as it does. What do you for yourself? Like, what, aside from writing, what do you do when you're in those moments of the slog of the trudging through the mud? What do you paint? Like, do you have any other creative outlets? Like, what do you do?
Actually, the thing that I really work at hardest and that I want to do is art. I never wanted to be a a writer, but I was always an obsessive artist. I don't have many of my pieces here, but that one on the wall
Oh, that's
that's
gorgeous.
just in the woods near my house.
Wow.
But I think
does it feel like
Oh my gosh.
but sometimes I'm like, oh, that is like it's an art piece that should be in a museum. But I feel like, are you just like excellent at everything you do?
I'm
Like,
horrible at almost everything. I would love to be able to do music, or I can't. Oh my God. People actually do imitations of the way I try to dance, like just to entertain each other. No, I'm horrible at almost everything, but I do love to read, and I love art. So, yeah, I go between them. And in answer to your question about what do you do when you're in the slog and it's just overwhelming, the first thing I do is I am willing to throw away huge amounts of work. They say in writing, you kill your darlings. I kill darlings every day. My art mentor at Harvard, a sculptor and teacher named Will Ryman, one day told me he had thrown away 90 pounds of drawings the day before. He said, not 90 drawings, 90 pounds of drawings. And he used to say that the sooner you make your first 5,000 mistakes, the sooner you get on to the next 5,000. That's what it feels like to be an artist. So I go back, I refer to people like that. I'm fully willing to throw away the work I've done. And then I reread 100 Years of Solitude, or I go online and I look at all of Michelangelo's drawings, or I get that inspiration going again by feeding myself with the art that has come through other people. And that is where you come out of the isolation of this process and it becomes community. And the joy of being with you two, for example, right now, there's an energy forming here similar to the energy that forms in little groups like the framers of the American democracy, right? They were just, or the Socratic philosophers or the French Impressionists, a bunch of friends who got together and started talking about their art and started helping each other and sharing ideas and showing each other work. And you get these explosions of creativity. In the book I just wrote, I called it, it's a cell. So the social structure of it is like, I mean, we use that to say terrorist cell, but it's also the cells of resistance to a tyranny. For me, there are cells forming to try to overthrow white supremacist patriarchy right now. And they're connected to the creation of art. There's an idealism that fuels that as well. So it's not just, I want to be making pretty pictures and nice poems. It interacts with the way society works and it shifts minds. That's what creativity does. It transforms people's psyches. And so it's profoundly important that we share. And it's also so much fun.
I love that. Martha, thank you for sharing that beautiful, is that a painting? Is it
Yeah,
acrylic,
that one's an oil painting.
Okay, that's so gorgeous. If those listening, definitely check out the YouTube video of this podcast, because this is just, like Rosie said, it belongs in a museum. It is.
Wow.
I mean, I could walk right into that.
Did you take a picture and then paint it, or did you just do it from your brain? Like, how does this happen?
Question. That's what I was
It's a
wondering.
place right next to. I pass it when I go to take my garbage out. I live in the forest of Pennsylvania, and it just that space was haunted by something really sacred. And so first I went and sat in it for a while, and then I took some reference photos, and then I could just go out and draw it and paint from real life while I was in the process. But a lot of times these days I have to get reference photos, but I do a drawing based on the reference photo, and then I throw the photo away.
Oh, and then you just create it.
Otherwise I'm too literal. I try to, I can make it look real. And that's how everybody's cell phone can make it look real.
Right.
And so, it's like, I don't just make pictures of things. I have to create pictures that in some way do that transmission of energy from whatever moved my heart and soul to something that I'm trying to reach your heart and soul. And it's magic. I mean, here's Tessa. She can take a line of little black marks on paper, and somebody 1,000 miles away and years separated in time can look at those little marks. We were talking about tracking before you came on. And I believe that animal tracking is the genetic basis of reading because it's following a line of marks across a page. But our minds are able to decode that. And so then my heart receives what was happening in Tessa's heart. If that's not magic, I don't know what is. I mean, that is just stunning that we can do that. It's amazing.
Martha, would you mind sharing that story with us that you told me about how you can? So I asked Martha about tracking because I know she will go on safaris and track animals. And Martha asked me where I lived in the world, and I said Pacific Northwest. And I was saying, well, I don't see a lot of animal tracks, although I do see the occasional animal tracks. There's a lot more people tracks. And Martha was telling me how she can also track people and started to figure out body language, stride, age, height, how this person, what mood they're in. Would you mind sharing that story, Martha?
Sure. I have learned a lot about tracking from a dear friend, Boyd Vardy, who grew up in the African savannah and is one of the most amazing animal trackers and heart trackers that exists on Earth. And he was teaching me to track. And we went to a village, an African village. And I said, I wish we could go out tracking. And he said, well, let's do it. All the streets were unpaved, right? So he says, pick a pair of feet. Let's track someone. And I chose, I looked down, there was a sort of flip-flop track. He said, okay, tell me who that is. Tell me what kind of person made it. Is it male, female? How old? What kind of mood was that person in? What was that person doing? What was on that person's mind? Just follow the tracks and tell me. And I was like, I have no idea. I mean, it's a man, and it's a fairly tall man because he's got a long stride length. And Boy says, okay, so what's he like? I was like, I don't know. And he said, try imitating that stride. And the toes were slightly turned out, and there was a rhythm to the step. So I started trying to mimic it, and I was doing this kind of strut. And I was like, oh my God, he's so into himself. It's a young, brash man. And he said, okay, so what's he doing? So we track along, and then they go off to the side, and then the tracks go on, but they're deeper. And he said, what happened? Well, obviously the guy he picked something up and he's carrying it, and it's heavy. And so the stride gets smaller, the guy's getting taller, but then suddenly the stride length increases. And I said, I think that means he's close to his destination, and he's speeding up because he gets to go to put down his burden. And we turn the corner, and here's like a 20-year-old dude with a big pack of wood on his back, and he's just dumping it near his house. And he was the person that I'd seen from the tracks. And it was an epiphany for me to realize how much we transmit and how much we can receive when we become open to every little sense impression. It's the slogging part. You have to work, think, and then stop working and stop thinking and let creativity have its way with you.
Yeah. Oh, this is such a great story, and what a great metaphor. I feel like so many people, just in the age that we're in with technology and distractions, I think so many people want result without the perspiration. And I think that's part of this process for me in creativity and just with anything that I do. But I'm a worker bee, since, growing up in East LA riots, chaotic environment to, now doing what I do. It's like I've always found value in the perspiration part.
Yeah.
As opposed to the reward part. But I feel like we're kind of losing that more and more. I see it, and I don't want to sound, like I don't want to, give that kind of assessment, but I find it, I have a little 26-year-old sister, and I just see it with that age demographic where they want the reward with little perspiration. And for me, I have to examine myself too. I'm like, maybe my way of thinking, I grew up in the 90s, so I'm like, maybe my way of thinking is antiquated and I need to kind of get with the times. But I feel like regardless of whatever time and era you're in, if you do the work and you're in motion, it has to pay off, right? I mean, it has to.
Yeah, one way or another. I mean, it will make a different person out of you, and it will make you better at lots of things. That's the other interesting thing. When you're using creativity, you're developing the right hemisphere of your brain. And the right hemisphere does this thing called far transfers, which I love. It'll take a concept, a process, a skill from one part of your life that you've practiced and apply it in a completely different way, so that all of a sudden you have a set of skills to draw on that you didn't know you had. An example of that is this man named David Cord Murray, he was assigned to make tax software. He was a tech guy. And TurboTax that's one of the big online companies. They wanted him to create this online thing that people could use for their own taxes. And he had just seen Star Wars. And he said, I didn't know anything about making calculating one's taxes, but I knew it was boring and everybody loved Star Wars. So what I did was I used the basic plot of Star Wars to make the TurboTax software.
What? That is wild.
Yeah. So the taxpayer is little Luke Skywalker in his little, whatever they call that, the little zip machine. And the government, the IRS or whatever, is the Death Star. And you've got to I have not used TurboTax, but I read David Cord Murray's book. It's called Borrowing Brilliance. And then later reading about brain, I realized that this is another a far transfer. So the more creativity you try to develop and the harder you work and the more impasses you get to, the more you will find that you will be able to learn other skills easily. And I don't think it has anything to do with generations or history, except that different generations use different creative media. So there are kids making TikTok videos that when I was a kid, I mean, they're high art, and there's a bunch of people making crap, and there's always been a mass of people.
But that's always been the case, right? I mean, that's always been the case.
There are always people making horrible art. And then there are people who occasionally break through the horrible art thing and make really good art.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. I totally agree, so I can never, I still do, trainings, not as often as I would in the past, but I used to, some of my colleagues, when we would do like a yoga teacher training, would say to me, have these grievances of, she's in the middle of doing another training and she just, it's really difficult for her to sit through and listen to these students of hers go through the trudge through learning how to teach. It can be long-winded, it's a process, and
it's an
art. I was like, right. And I'm like, to me, I love listening to people start in the beginning to try and learn, to see people try and figure things out. And I loved taking classes with beginners because to me, I'm like, they're wanting to get to a place. I was there, right? Like we all started from somewhere. We didn't just come into this world with knowledge and wisdom and experience. We had to learn. And for me, it's part of that beginner's mind, right? So for me, like that's kind of where I like to live. It also keeps me humble. It also
and that beginner's mind and humility are two of the things that allow creativity to use us. If you start to get arrogant or you don't want to accept the fact that you're going to have to work hard, creativity just checks out. But if you show up with beginner's mind and say, I'm just I'm just trying. I'm just starting out, but I'm going to try really hard. I believe that I can do this. If you do that enough, amazing things happen. And one of my favorite artists is not very well known in the US, although one of his paintings is the most reproduced painting in history. His name was Hokusai. He was a Japanese artist, and he made that picture of the wave that is cresting. It's a Japanese block print. He was a magician with a brush and color. What he did was so hard that it's like a moon landing or something. He was astonishing. And at 96, he said, I think if I can just live another 10 years, I might get the hang of this. He was
I love that.
just flat out in beginner's mind, because you're always pushing the end. It means you're never finished. And you're always frustrated.
Yeah.
And you're always opening yourself to these moments of divine inspiration where everything goes right. And you think, I never want to do anything else for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Well, how do we play with that balance then? Because you hear so many people say sometimes you have to, what is it? Fake it till you make it, right? You have to pretend, okay, if I put myself in that space of, mastery, like what is that like? What does that feel like for me? See that I go straight to what is your desire to want to be a master at something? Like where's that coming from? But sort of where do we find that balance of I want to feel confident in what I'm doing, but I still want to be in that state of authenticity and humility. And I know that you speak to this in The Way of Integrity, which is one of my all-time favorite books. It really is. But how do we keep that, right? So how do we maintain the confidence and humility?
It's really, really simple and really, really hard. You say every single day, I sit down and try to make something, a difference in the world, a picture, a book. I am going to do my best. Now, that's just a phrase. It falls off the tongue easily. But when I say it, I am trying to do my best. And that means if there is anything that I can see that I could do better, I have to try to do it better. I just got back the second round of edits for my current book, which is called Beyond Anxiety. And it's all about creativity as you can take the energy that's fueling your anxiety and use it to be creative. And that makes your anxiety go away, which is like an exciting finding for me. And it's made me paint a lot more. In fact, my therapist started painting after I talked to her about it. Anyway, I get up every day at 6:00 and I go right into the painting studio and my little tiny painting studio. And I'm like, if there is anything wrong, I'm going to fix it. And then I sit down with my book and it's in the second round of edits. My editor really liked it. And there's a chapter that's really, really, for me, the heart and soul of the book, and it's about awakening. It's about a psychological, spiritual, emotional awakening. And it's passed all the tests. It's climbed over every hurdle. I did my absolute best. And my editor says, I'm not sure I know what you mean by awakening. So instead of correcting spelling errors and adding a few, dotting the I's and crossing the T's the way I thought I would, I've spent the last 3 days ripping that thing apart. At one point, I'd written it up to being like 65 pages. It's a 20-page chapter. Then I had to find it. Where am I? I'm completely lost. What do I do? I have been working on this chapter, and it was supposed to be a spell check. But I read those 20 pages and I said, these could be better. And I've spent like 100 hours trying to make them better. And when I've done my absolute best, I'll send it in. And I try to do that with all those 200 magazine articles. They had to be the absolute best I could do. That's not easy.
Oh, no.
I'm thinking about, how they say, quote unquote, art is subjective. And when you talk about somebody, producing something from that space of inspiration and it being absolute dog crap at first and needing to go through iterations and editing and fine tuning a craft, I guess I'm wondering, how do we know when it's good enough? How do we know when it's ready? Considering that, I don't know, do you believe that art being good is subjective?
Yeah, but I don't have any judgment on other people's art except to say that, there are some artists appeal to me, some writers appeal to me more than others.
Yeah.
My subjectivity can only work on my own art. So when I say, could it be better? I'm asking my own integrity. I'm asking the truest part of me. Does that please me? Does that express what I wanted to express? Is that rising to the standard that I want to rise to when I look at other people's work? And there is a time, and you know this, when a poem you read it and it sings to you. And you think, and what really good artists always think at that moment is, I don't know how I did that. I don't know why and how, but I finally got it to work. Even though you've been learning and learning and pushing, when it finally works, it feels like an act of grace. And I totally believe that we are all, Mother Teresa said, we're pencils in the hands of God. And I think about those many-armed goddesses in Hinduism. If the goddess had 1 billion arms and 1 billion hands, each one of us is one of the hands that God is using to create what God wants to see next. And when something works, there is this feeling of creativity that you've joined with the creativity of the entire universe. And it can be quite psychedelic just to look at a few words on a page that actually work and think, that I wrote that.
Totally.
Have you had that experience?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Sometimes, I even will go back and look at the book of poetry that I did publish, and I'll try to remember what inspired that. Where was I? Because I honestly don't have a memory of writing this. Some of the things I do, but maybe that's what you're referring to.
And I think it's partly because you're on the right side of the brain, but I also think the right side of the brain is bringing in something numinous, something that is beyond, that's metaphysical. What's it like for you, Rosie? When you read something and you go, or you've done something and you look at what you've created, it could be an event, it could be a meeting of some kind, it could be a teaching.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, it's definitely the writing and going back to, as you were saying, it was one spell check and you just ended up with a whole, 60 plus pages. But it was, I went and I rewrote my book during that process, not the entirety of it, but I would say 80% of it within the editing 6-month period. And I remember just sitting there and I print it out and then I handwrite my edits on it because it just feels a little bit more tactile. I'm a tactile person.
Totally. Yeah.
So I remember just going through every single sentence and approaching it from a very is this true? Is this true? Is this true? Is this true? Instead of scrutinizing it and trying to make it sound a certain way, it's is this true? And I really feel in that process, as I was reading it, I'm oh, it would be really cool to say this next. And I did, so I'm okay, so that's good. So that means that thought is complete. But somebody just recently on Instagram, they sent me a screenshot of a paragraph from my first book. And she said, what you said here really, resonated with me. And I read it and I'm wow, how did I write that? What? That is just so wild and bizarre because it does feel like that portion. And I'm curious, for you too, Martha, you've written so many books and articles. It's there has to be a current, right? There's a current of how we see the world, how we translate or integrate information, wisdom, some sort of thing that we're wanting to bring to fruition. But how are we able to do it in different ways? It's just so wild to me, right? That we can, like you said, that part of the brain is working in a way where you're kind of channeling,
Yeah.
information.
Actually, I think that literally is, I don't know. I don't necessarily believe that, but I don't not believe it. And I've had, like, I remember this woman told me she was she'd started channeling. And so I was like, okay, I want to see this. This friend of mine has learned to channel. And so I got together a little group of friends, and she started channeling a very, someone with, I'm trying to think of a way to put this that's not going to get me in trouble. Somebody with brain damage is basically what she was channeling. Like, what was coming out was very, I believe she was channeling. Anyway, I just say that so I can demystify this thing, because the moment you say, I'm becoming a channel, that's the moment you're tempted to stand up on a pedestal and say,
yes,
I'm a hero, I'm a guru, I'm a spiritual master. And that is just death. That is anathema to me. But yeah, people come up to me and say, thank you for the advice you gave me. I followed it and it worked. And I'm like, what did I say? And they tell me stuff and I'm like, I would never have said that. No, I did. They'll tell me, like, one man came up and he said, you remember you told me that my wife was pregnant. He met me at a book signing. And apparently at this book signing, he told me that they were trying to get pregnant and they'd been trying for 10 years. And I told him, oh, she's pregnant now. You'll have a baby in about 7 months. He said that I said that, but I don't remember saying that. I would never say that. I didn't know his freaking wife. So something is happening. Something is working through us. And I do believe it's an aspect of our own selves that we all share a consciousness, one infinite consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's the slogging work of creativity as a mere human. And then the dropping of effort after long, long effort that allows this thing to start to happen through us.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And it was taking me back. The channel thing was taking me back to, I agree with you. I have a hard time when people put themselves on a pedestal and say, like, I'm going to channel for you. Let me tell you what you need to hear. It's like, it's scary. It's like the minute somebody says they have something figured out, I just want to run in the opposite direction.
Exactly.
But in Liz Gilbert's book, Big Magic, she talks about the sort of that transference of energy, or however she talks about her meeting Ann Patchett. They were both writing a similar story.
Like almost exactly similar.
Almost exactly.
Crazy similar. Yeah.
And I've had things like that happen to me in not that exact way, but, and I love Ann Patchett too. She's such an incredible writer. To me, like, I believe that. Like, I do believe that creativity works in that way. I do believe that you have to, create the ground for it, set the stage for her. I mean, like, for me, I have like a space if I'm really and even especially when I don't feel creative, it's like, I make myself my little tea, I light a candle, I get my little, like, have these little like postcard things that I like to write notes on, and I just have it set. Even if I don't write anything of note, I just have to just at least create the space for it.
Show up. And studies show that people who just show up, as opposed to people who show up, this is creative writing. They had a bunch of English teachers evaluate the quality of work. Some of it was done by just slogging along every day. And some of it, what they said, just wait for the muse to hit you and write down whatever feels best. And the ones who slog always come out writing the better material. But it's not every single day. It's that they incrementally get better and better. And then there are the moments of breakthrough. So the slog and the inspiration, it's like in Zen, they say, after the ecstasy, the laundry. And and before the ecstasy, the laundry. And the artistic process, and I want to ask you all a question about this, but the artistic process is about a Sisyphean labor, dragging a boulder up a hill every single day. Even if you've got a little candle and you're fuzzy and your cup of coffee, you're still slogging along with that boulder. And a combination of that and becoming a channel for divine energy. It's the best of times and the worst of times.
Yeah.
Here's my question. Are you guys feeling it more lately? The push to create?
Oh, I love
I
that.
think for me, I'm going to answer yes. Right now, it's the craziest thing because, Martha, I'm writing another book more in the same genre. But I have had this novel idea. Tessa knows about it. I've had this novel idea.
Oh, no.
Rattling. It's a crime thriller. It's been rattling around my brain for years. I would say a good 8 years. And I have plenty of writing done. And I've got
Right.
the plan and, the mind maps. I've talked to my agent about it. I have a good structure, but I've kind of abandoned it at times. It just kind of felt like there was a moment where I'm like, I just want to get it done, so it's done, and
Right.
that energy didn't feel right to me, right? It just felt like, and then there was other times where I'm like, oh, it's kind of heavy, and I'm doing the work with going up to the prisons, like I'm doing some volunteer
Mhm.
work, so then I really wanted to take a break on it. I'm like, I don't know that I could get into the crime thriller space right now, but lately, as of the last couple of months, I've just had this incredible surge of that thing. And I don't even want, it's like I don't want it to go away, so I don't even want to say it, but it's just like, yes, to answer your question in a long-winded way, yes, I do feel that there is a deep sense of creativity.
Something's happening to all my friends and like everybody's. Like I told you, I went to my therapist and I said, I am painting compulsively. You got to help me. And she tried, and then she started painting compulsively. It's like she started texting me pictures of really good oil paintings, and I was like, "What's happening?"
Oh my God, that's awesome! I just ordered some Bob Ross paints as well, so I'm like, maybe I just need to get that part of my brain.
Gives you some beautiful little victories right from the get-go. Tessa, are you feeling it?
I am. I'm feeling that creative spark that I think that for a little while has been dormant, but to me, they often come in dreams or when I'm consuming some sort of story, whether it's written or like I'm watching a TV series right now about a young girl who she's an aspiring writer, and she's going through this process of writing a book, trying to get published, trying to write the second book, similar to what Rosie's doing.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking, I remember when I was a kid and I would read stories and I would see how something was written so beautifully, a metaphor or something. And I felt like, oh, I could see how they did that.
Yeah.
Oh, I could do that. I could do that too.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to feel that kind of like push and urge again more. So yeah, it's exciting.
All my life I have thought I would be part of a change in human consciousness. I mean, literally since I was 4 years old, I thought this. I didn't use those words. I just knew that there was going to be a shift in the way people thought, and that I was on earth to help with it. And then as I grew up, it became obsessive. And it's always at the center of everything I do, but I've never known how it's going to happen or what it's going to look like. And I honestly believe that this need to make art that we're feeling is part of how we dissolve the dying, homicidal, unfair, horrific social system that has been dominating human beings for the last several thousand years. The white supremacist patriarchy, the master's house. As Audre Lorde says, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So all the marching in the streets, all the political work, I'm hugely grateful for. But I have a feeling art is what changes people's minds, people's brains. I think that a transformation of consciousness may decide to use art and any kind of creativity as its royal road.
Yeah, I love that so much, Martha. I think that always makes me think of my dad, who's done a lot of work with trauma, PTSD, children who have been incarcerated. And he always uses the language of poetry to start because there's nothing more adequate that speaks to the soul in his opinion, and I agree with him, I am his daughter, then something that comes in the form of art, such as poetry, it cuts through the ego and the rational mind, and it speaks directly to our souls.
Yeah.
Martha, oh my gosh, we could go on and on with you all day. I don't want to let you go, but I do want to ask you one final question, a tactical one, and then maybe Rosie, you want to ask one final question too. I'm not sure, but where can people go to connect with you? Where do you like best to connect with people on the socials and find your work?
I'm sort of on the socials, but my website is the best way to get in touch with me. Right now, I'm doing every year I do a summer course where I get to actually interact with people in large groups, but it's still really interactive. So if you want to find out about that stuff, go to my website, marthabeck.com. You can always find me there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, of course.
I don't have any other questions. I mean, I do. I have tons, but I just really am grateful. I mean, you're what you said, and I've heard you talk about your desire for impact for a long time. So I know that it rings true to your purpose and your work and your writings and what you do. And I do have to say, I mean, part of the impact that you've created is why we're here. I mean, I remember reading your books like a long, I'm not going to date myself, but long, very, very long time ago, at least 2020, 2005, I think, when I think Leaving the Saints was the first book I read. But I mean, your work has really inspired me, in creating this. So, I mean, and here we are, I'm talking to you.
That's
and now
fun.
the people that are listening to this, are hopefully taking something of value from the conversation and continuing their journey, their creative journey. And so I'm just really grateful and honored and humbled by you and your work. And I'm so I'm hoping that this is, that we continue to explore this landscape.
I do too. So I hope everybody out there takes tracking as a metaphor. And if something, my teacher Boyd always says that what we're tracking through life is joy in the body. So find the things that bring you joy in the body, and you will go to the art or the science or the activism that you're meant to do. And you'll have the slog, and you'll have the suffering, and you'll have the inspiration, and you'll have the community. And that's why I'm so grateful to connect with you guys again, because you're out there on the cutting edge doing what has to be done, and it's amazing.
Thanks, Martha. Final question. How do you feel radically loved?
Literally by every single thing in the world. Like it just literally everything feels alive and loving to me. So yeah, everything. I look out the window, radically loved. I fall asleep, radically loved. Oh my God. I see your faces. Oh my goodness, I'm radically loved. It's everywhere. As my son with Down syndrome says, it comes from everywhere.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you all so much. Those of you who are watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It really helps. Also, if you're listening to this on whatever platform you're listening on, please subscribe, rate, and review, and let us know what you thought. Thanks so much.
Hey friends, thank you so much for listening to the Radically Love podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps. Also, don't forget to check out the Mindful Love Hub on Substack. This episode was produced by Tessa Tovar, music by DJ Taz Rashid.